Next rule, get the literal meaning first, then look for the spiritual application. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, Paul tells us, now all these things happened unto them for examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So what Paul's talking about, if you read the context, Paul is giving us the context of the things that happened to everybody in the Old Testament. You know, there are a lot of churches and Christians today who think that, you know, anything in the Bible prior to the New Testament is not relevant for us today. Basically, Paul, even in the first century AD, is saying, look, you still need to read the Old Testament. That's why us as Christians, we still have the Old Testament in our Bible. If the Old Testament had no purpose for us today, why is it in our Bibles? We can make our Bibles about 2/3 thinner if we just carried around the New Testament. And there are people who have done that. Not saying that it's bad to have just a New Testament version of Scripture, but it's not the full and complete picture of Scripture. You know, what you want to do is you want to, you know, look and see if the spiritual application is that, or, you know, you look at, see what's going on, then you figure out your spiritual application. Then, as long as your spiritual application is reinforced by Scripture, you're good. If it contradicts, your application is wrong. You also need to understand types. So a type is an earthly example of a heavenly truth. The chapter of 1 Corinthians 10 that we just referenced correlates with Exodus chapter 17 and Numbers chapter 20. So what you see in 1 Corinthians 10 or Exodus 17 and Numbers 20, when you read those chapters, so the children of Israel, they're in the wilderness. So, you know, there's millions of them walking around. They need water. They're in the middle of a desert. So God, in Exodus 17, tells Moses to walk up to a rock with his staff and strike the rock. And when he does, the rock breaks in half and water flows forth, and the people get water. But in Numbers chapter 20, children of Israel walking around, they're 40 years in the wilderness because they refused to go in the land of Israel. So they once again are at a point where they have no water. We got to, you know, what are we going to do? Oh my God, Moses, we're going to die, you know, that kind of thing. So God tells Moses, Moses, this time take the rod in your hand and go speak to the rock. Well, Moses is frustrated because for 40 years, he's dealt with these people complaining all the time. So he takes his stick, he hits the rock, water comes out. But because he hit the rock a second time, that is the reason why Moses was not allowed to enter into the promised land. Now you think, man, that's harsh. Why is God so mean? Well, God was trying to teach and type that the rock, Jesus, the Son of God, was going to come and he was going to be struck. Yeah, he was going to die on a cross. But then, and you know, because Christ is often referred to as the living water. And when the water rushed out, living water is water that's moving. So, you know, here you have a picture of, you know, the crucifixion brings forth the living water. But then in the future, you're only to speak. So essentially, Moses inadvertently was teaching the people of Israel that Christ would be crucified twice. That's how seriously God takes types. That's just one type that I walked you through. Another type could be what we just talked about in the last slide. Maybe looking at how Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days, and how does that correlate to the children of Israel being in the wilderness for 40 years? Need a little more study on that before I go too deep into that, but that's what you're looking for when you look at types. Also, understand symbolism. Symbols represent other than what the literal text says. You will see time and time again there are references to stuff, and if you understand the symbolism, you can get more of a meaning. So you'll see things like the fig tree. A lot of times in Scripture, the fig tree is talking about a literal fig tree, but a fig tree is also a symbol for Israel. Leaven or yeast, the thing that makes bread rise, the thing I probably messed up with. Leaven is always a type or is a symbol for sin. That's why there were all these things in the Jewish diet with unleavened bread. Fire, a lot speaks of judgment. Now, let me be careful here. So I believe that there is literal fire in heaven. It's not metaphorical. It's not, symbolic. But you'll see other scriptures where it talks about, God's going to take your works and, set them on an altar, put them on fire, and those things that are, hay and stubble will be burned up. And, he's not talking about he's not talking about literally setting something on fire in that scripture. He's talking about that fire judges. Fire is also a cleansing agent. So, again, you can't forget context, comparing scripture with scripture. All these 7 rules, it's not one at a time. You have to take all 7 of these together. Lastly, when the scripture makes plain sense, seek no other meaning. We have to be careful that we don't take things too far and get overzealous in trying to find something that fits. If you think you see something, okay, compare it with other scripture. If the other scripture doesn't support it, don't get so fixated on that thing like, ooh, maybe there's something here that, we don't know. So, try not to look too detailed into things because you can drive yourself crazy doing that.